go.
There you go.
Yeah. Hi, this is Alise Chaffins. I'm your host. Welcome to Best Worst Movies, where we discuss terrible movies that we still love. I'm joined today by Sebastian Zavala. He is a critic and a film director and movie maker out of Peru, and I'm so excited to have him here. So, welcome, Sebastian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this film that I know you don't love, and I know it's not particularly good, but that I still love, just like you said. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So, why don't you tell us what movie we're talking about today?
Okay, so we're gonna be talking about A Knight's Tale, which was written and directed by Brian Helgeland and stars the late Heath Ledger. And yeah, it's a film that I remember seeing at the cinema when I was like, I think I was like 10 because it was released in 2001.
Hmm.
And even at the time, I mean, even though I was a kid and everything, I guess it was the music or the humor or something that really attracted me to it. And I remember that my dad also liked it mainly because of the soundtrack. And when I grew up and became an adult, I felt like maybe it's the kind of film that you loved when you were a kid, and maybe if you revisit it, it's not gonna be as good. And
Hmm.
even though, because of the series you're doing, even though I know it's not a masterpiece or anything, there's just something about it that works for me, I guess. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. I think
Yeah.
there is a lot of nostalgia that sometimes
Oh
ties
yeah.
these for sure. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but also it is funny. I posted on social media when I was rewatching the movie, and I had said something along the lines of one of the big things for me that I do not like about this movie is the soundtrack, and that seems to be a very divisive opinion.
Yeah.
Because most people, yeah, in my feed anyway, were like, oh my gosh, it's the best soundtrack ever. So there were very strong opinions about that.
Yeah, I used to have the CD actually. I don't know where it is right now, but yeah. I think it's one of those things that you either love or you hate, because it's obviously very, very anachronistic. It's a medieval tale that's actually really, really believable, or that it was well researched in some areas in terms of the way that jousts used to work, in the way that the differences in social class used to work in that time,
Hmm.
between peasants and the royals and stuff like that, and knights. But at the same time, you have this really, really anachronistic soundtrack, which is composed mainly of classic rock. So it's a weird combination. So you either go with it or you either hate it. So which is understandable. It's
Yeah.
not something that I can totally understand that.
Yeah, it's funny because people definitely had very strong opinions about that when I posted about it. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So one of the things I like to do is to go through, since we're basing this off of Rotten Tomatoes, which I know is kind of an iffy sort of thing. And this movie is right on the edge of Rotten. It's 59%. So it
Yeah,
just squeaks under being rotten, being a fresh movie rather. But I love to find some of the like pull quotes from different reviews and
sure.
that I absolutely loved. And this is mostly because I am not a huge fan of the music in particular, was from Peter Kioff of the Boston Phoenix, and he wrote, "Now that class struggle and Western literature have been debased, all that's left is the music of Queen." And I just thought that was really, really a funny, well written little zinger in there from a negative review.
I mean, if you don't like the music aspect of the film, I totally get it. Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes sense. It makes sense that you see it that way. But yeah, because it's very focused on classic Queen songs. "We Will Rock You" and stuff like that.
Right.
And I actually like. I mean, to be fair, it's a big swing. It's a risky proposal, and I usually, because it's the kind of person I am, I guess, I usually appreciate it more when a filmmaker takes a big swing. It might work, it might not work, but still it's a risk. And I think
Hmm.
that's 1,000 times better than something that's been done before 1,000 times, or something that's not particularly risky. And I remember, and I even read this as a kid, that I remember that Brian Helgeland's justification for including these classic songs was that he, in his research, because at the beginning he was planning on doing a more regular, I guess, medieval film. But he found out that apparently in those times, when because joust competitions were so popular, that peasants and regular people who went to see those kinds of things, they had their chants and their ways of supporting their favorite knights. So
Mhm.
he just made that connection. What if we convert those medieval chants or ways of supporting people into contemporary expressions of support? Classic rock music. I think at one point they do like the wave or something, from
Yeah.
what I remember, which obviously didn't exist in those times. So it was like a way of making that aspect of the story feel more like contemporary sport events, I guess.
Yeah. And I will say, even though it's not like a favorite movie of mine, it's a very memorable movie. Like, it's not one that you watch and immediately forget. Like, you might forget elements of it. Like, I remember
Yeah.
watching it a while ago, and I genuinely remember thinking, oh, the main reason I didn't particularly care for this movie is because of the music, the soundtrack that like doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
But I will say, exactly like you said, it does have this certain amount of, yeah, like because it is this big swing, it definitely gives it a little bit more, yeah, like presence in the zeitgeist or whatever. And it has persisted for a long time, and I think that's at least in part because of the soundtrack. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it can be memorable in a good way or a bad way, but
Yeah.
you still remember it.
But I mean, that's something. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
for the vast majority of movies, you watch them and they kind of float off into the ether. So it's really something to have some, here's this, kind of odd, interesting thing. And a lot of the story beats are fairly like boilerplate, but
Mm.
because it has that soundtrack with it, it does give it something that you can like cling on to and remember beyond, you know, like just an initial viewing and then it's just gone.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Because otherwise, it probably would have been like you would confuse it with any other medieval kind of story, I guess. Um, so yeah, I guess yeah, that's one of the reasons why it's so memorable. And I guess also maybe the cast, because I mean, I know you have like a whole structure for the episode, but
oh no, we can
yeah, but
jump. I'm good.
okay, awesome. So it feels like a very, in a good way, I think, obviously because I like the film, but it feels like a very early 2000s movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you have Heath Ledger, who's obviously not with us anymore. You have Rufus Sewell, who's this very strong character actor who usually plays villains, and he's obviously the villain of the story, and he's really good in that role. You have Shannyn Sossamon, who used to be really big in those times and who has like faded away a little bit in recent
Right.
times, but she made a lot of films in the early 2000s, stuff like that. You have a younger Paul Bettany who plays a really really fictionalized version of Geoffrey Chaucer, who is more characterized like this sort of like people's poet or something like that, which is I think also it's a memorable part of the story. You have the great Alan Tudyk, who's
Oh,
really
yeah.
awesome in everything. So I think that I mean, even if you're not very convinced by the music or stuff like that, I think you can find a lot of stuff to like in the cast, I think.
No, I totally agree because
Mhm.
when I pull the music out of it, like there is so much to enjoy about the movie.
Yeah.
Like the movie itself is enjoyable. And I think that's in reading some of the like negative reviews, that really does seem to be it. A lot of it is there's this real strong divide between the people who like the music and the people who are like, no, thank you. And
Yeah,
then
this is
just,
so weird.
yeah, exactly. And I do think that we've like, and I will say that it has become a thing that's done a lot more since then. Like
Mm.
you see that show up more often now where we kind of have this blend. Somebody mentioned like that Bridgerton does that. So you have these shows that have this, very period kind of piece, and then it pulls in something way outside of that. And I think that is something that, yeah, like it's an interesting thing. And I don't know that there are a whole lot of films prior to A Knight's Tale that did that like mixed that as much.
So
So
maybe we can say it was ahead of its time, maybe.
no, there it is. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So you said you saw this for the first time back when you were little, and
Yeah.
do you think that nostalgia plays into it, or is it, where do you feel about? all of that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I have to be the first one to admit it. Definitely. Yeah. Because, the older we get, I'm already 33 years old. It's not that old, but still. And the older we get, the more, rose-tinted glasses we have for, childhoods and all the films, especially when you're a movie lover like us, all the films we saw when we were kids or teenagers or whatever. And, I have this very strong memory of watching it with my dad at a cinema that no longer exists, by the way. Of seeing the poster outside of it, the fact that we like the music and we bought the CD and everything. So yeah, I think that plays a big part. And I think in general, because when we were about to do this episode, you asked me like which films could be like part of the series, which movies I have that are basically, guilty pleasures. And I think like most of them, if not all of them, there's the big, nostalgia part in those, maybe films I watched as a kid or that I enjoyed with some person in particular. It was a big part of, some kind of event in my life or whatever. So, I mean, what I will say is that we do not watch films in a vacuum. There's always a context, and they usually, whether they're good or bad, they make you remember something, an emotion or a person or a situation or like an era of your life maybe. So yeah, nostalgia definitely plays a part, but I think it's also healthy to admit it. Like I mean, I obviously would like to come back to your show, but if we ever, for example, do something like Van Helsing, which is considered to be a terrible film, I actually included it in my list because I know it's terrible. I would be able to write a review panning it because it's really bad. I still enjoy it. So, and I'm in the case of A Knight's Tale, I don't think it's as bad. I think it's more defensible, for example. But some of the other films I include in my list are pretty much indefensible unless you really admit that it's bad, but you still, find some fun in it, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think all the time one of like my all-time favorite movies is the 1989 Pet Cemetery. It
Oh,
is a
really?
horrible, horrible movie, but
That's
I
interesting.
have so much affection for that movie because I can like see where I was sitting in this old theater that also was torn down since I saw that, and like sneaking in because I was, underage. I wasn't supposed to be at that movie. And I remember going and sitting in there, and it was just so much fun. So yeah, it's an awful movie. And like you, I could explain easily why it's easy to explain why it's a bad movie, but there is something just about it. And I think that's what I love about film in general is that we all bring so much to each thing that we watch. And I think that can be really fun because yeah, it's why I don't hold terribly much to, yeah, this might be a bad movie, but if it's not a bad, if you don't think that it's bad, is it bad? It doesn't matter because it's only a matter of is it bad to you or not?
Yeah, and in the case of this film, it also has like a pretty big cult following, I think.
Oh, for
And
sure,
and
for sure.
and and so I think that helps because you can find a lot of people who actually enjoy it and can say, okay, maybe the musical aspect is really divisive, but at the same time we have this great cast and this memorable dialogue or these memorable moments. For example, I always remember whenever there are these like how do you call it, like arc words, this dialogue that keeps being repeated in different contexts, which is like a literary or script writing device that I enjoy usually, which is every time our hero, our Heath Ledger, he keeps being I just forgot the word. Sorry about that. They don't consider him to be as good as he thinks he is, because
Hmm.
he comes from a poor family. He's a peasant, in the context of the film, only knights or royals or someone with a royal connection can be a knight and can participate in these jousts. So he like basically, he gets his own armor and he pretends to be a royal and stuff like that. And but even though he's a really smart guy, they keep telling him, you have been weighed, you have been measured, and you have been found wanting. So they keep telling him, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, until obviously in the end he shows that he was good enough, and he even gets pardoned by the king and stuff like that. Sorry for the spoilers, but it's a
Ah,
22-year-old film.
yeah, exactly.
And you can still enjoy it. You know,
Right.
it's not. I mean, if I have to be critical of it, it's pretty predictable. You know, it's not a very surprising film, I guess.
Right. Yeah, but even so,
Yeah.
it's super fun. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
how do you feel like it holds up? Like if you've watched it any recently, what do you think, compared to 10-year-old you and watching it now? How do you feel like that holds up and stacks up?
I mean, you also have a different perspective when you're older. I can see the seams, I guess. You know, it can be a little bit more critical. You know, like I was saying, the fact that the story is pretty predictable. You know, that it's a very kind of like a rags to riches kind of story. You know, this guy who keeps being told that he's not enough, and he has to show that he can be something more. That you don't have to be like a royal, have connections or money or anything like that to be in order to be important or to some people. The fact that he also falls in love with someone who comes from another reality, I guess. So it's very, it almost feels like a I don't know if a power fantasy, but it is a fantasy.
Mhm.
And it's pretty nice, I guess, because the overall message is, obviously people in power and people with means and people with money have privileges and have advantages, but it can also be possible, in some way to overcome your disadvantages and, work hard and be something more, I guess, which is cool. But yeah, it's pretty predictable. And, aside from the performances themselves, and I guess the way Heath Ledger's character, William Thatcher, has been written, I think the other ones are pretty archetypical, I guess. His friends and the love interest and everything like that. You can, I mean, I do enjoy, even though Shannyn Sossamon's character Jocelyn, who's a little bit archetypical, I did enjoy the character of Kate, who's this like blacksmith, this female blacksmith, and I think her inclusion makes the film feel a little bit better in terms of its female characters, because otherwise I think they would be pretty underwritten, to be fair.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And it's fun. It's something like when I went and watched it again recently, it was really something to look at this cast. It is just like this really spectacular cast. I'd forgotten that Alan Tudyk was in it
Yeah.
somehow. Like, yeah, I know that's like absurd, but for some reason I had completely forgotten that he was a part of it, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is just a stellar cast, and I think they all bring so much to it. It's such a fun. Like you can tell, it feels like they're all having a good time doing it. And I
Yeah.
always like that in a movie when you can kind of like see that the actors are having fun with the parts. I mean, Paul Bettany is, I mean, he is just all in on his Chaucer character. It is phenomenal.
Yeah, no, apparently he screwed up his throat because he had to shout so much, because he's shouting and doing these big speeches to the audience, before the jousts and everything. And I mean, he chose the scenery, but I think it works, especially in contrast with the other characters, because he's supposed to be, very over the top and larger than life. But I think he still has a couple of like very, very, subdued or honest moments, which I think make him feel a little bit less of a cartoon. So yeah, no, everybody's having a good time. And it's interesting because there was this time, in the early 2000s, because I guess they had so much fun, that Heath Ledger made a couple more films with this director. The first one
Mhm.
was A Knight's Tale. I think it was just one called The Order. I remember seeing that one in the theater too. I think nobody saw it because nobody talks about it, and and I think it was a flop and everything. But I still, saw it in the at the cinema, because as a kid, I went with my family, with my dad, pretty much every Sunday, and we pretty much saw everything. And we saw the cast, we saw the director. It was the same people from A Knight's Tale, but it's a very different film. It's basically Heath Ledger plays a priest, sorry, that has to investigate a murder, and he becomes involved in a conspiracy, and it's something of a downer. But it has Heath Ledger, it has Addy, it has Shannyn Sossamon. It's also written and directed by Brian Helgeland. So you're like, oh, interesting. I guess they had such a good time with A Knight's Tale that they actually managed to make a second film. But it's I mean, if you didn't like A Night's Tale, I think this is much worse. So, and it's, I mean, it's not, it doesn't have any kind of like contradicting elements. It doesn't have any kind of like, um, more music or anything. It's more traditional, I guess.
Hmm.
But funnily enough, I think that's why it doesn't work. It's pretty dull, to be fair.
Right.
But I haven't seen it in years, so maybe I would. I don't know if it's available anywhere. I think it's one of those films that came and went, and because nobody remembers them, they're kind of hard to find. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
But that is interesting because yeah, I mean, you can think of like directors who have their casts and everything that like go with them. We just
Yeah.
see Scorsese coming out and he has another movie with De Niro and Quentin Tarantino and he has his people that he works with. And I do think it's interesting because yeah, you don't necessarily think um of A Knight's Tale being part of this like larger cast kind of thing that happens elsewhere. So yeah, that's really interesting. I was not aware that another
I think
another
no.
movie starring that group happened.
Yeah, pretty much nobody's aware, so don't worry.
Yeah, okay.
It's
Uh,
fine. That's normal.
all right. So back in the day, what would have been your favorite part of the movie? What was it? What would you say is now? Or those two different things, or is it kind of the same all the way through?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, from what I remember when I saw it for the first time, I guess it was just that mixture of like this medieval aesthetic that's modernized because, it's really well researched, and it includes some really accurate elements from the time. But at the same time, this blacksmith character, Kate, he makes him like a modern looking armor. And
Hmm.
she I mean, I think that's the worst joke in the film, but she even, she carves like a Nike logo
Yeah.
on the armor, which is so weird. Even when I was a kid, I was like, that doesn't work. What the hell? I mean, I mean, you have to admit it. But I think it was that mixture between really modern or contemporary elements, set in a medieval time. And I think I just love the characters. People mention the music and everything, but I think it's in the end, even if you don't like, or enjoy the musical aspects, I think it's pretty much, Heath Ledger and Mark Addy, who's really underrated. He was
Oh,
the king in the first season of Game of Thrones. Rufus Sewell, who, he's been a little bit typecast, but I think he always does a good job as a villain. He has one of those faces,
yeah.
he looks. I mean, I'm sure he's a nice man, but he looks sinister, and the way
Yeah,
he
him
performs
and Michael
everything.
Shannon.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh, they would make a really good duo in another film.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's a good idea. Shannyn Sossamon, who I miss because she was great. Paul
Mhm.
Bettany, who was awesome, and I think it's yeah, I think it was the characters and the lines and the moments and the little details. So that's interesting. And nowadays, like I said before, I can see more of the scenes or the flaws, but I still have a good time. I think it's what you said. I think it's really entertaining and it's different because even though we've had other films that have mixed all the contemporary elements with more elements from other periods, I think not in this way.
Hmm.
Tarantino does it a lot. He included a lot of contemporary or modern music in Inglourious Bastards, in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and stuff like that. But even in his, I mean, he has a very different style. It's different, but the way they did it in here, you don't see it a lot even nowadays, which is
Hmm.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's totally fair. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the main thing I remember from watching it before is, the elements that I didn't like, but I remember from before and even just the other day when I watched Paul Bettany just, oh my goodness, he just makes me so happy. He's such a fantastic actor, and I agree. I think Mark Addy is somebody who kind of gets missed in talking about, but goodness, his just body of work is so fun. Like, I think one of my favorites of his will always be The Full Monty. I love him in that
Oh
movie.
yeah, of course, definitely.
But yeah, it's just, yeah, he's just such a gift, and it's fun to watch him too. And it's interesting because he always has this like, I think that's one of the things when I was watching it this time, is to see all these side characters who are essentially like comedic characters, but they all bring so much heart to the story as well. Like none of them are completely flat. Like they all have some depth to them. And I think that is what makes this work, yeah, compared to like other things as well, is it definitely has this depth that's a little bit more than what you would expect from an action movie. What, you know, what's essentially an action movie or a love story or whatever. It has a little more to it than just that. The elements of class division are really interesting, of a kid leaving his father and then coming back to him. I mean, they're just some really truly beautiful moments in the movie. And while maybe it doesn't all like work together, I do think there's a lot in it that's that's worth watching it for, outside of, yeah, any particular thing. I mean, yeah, it's fun to see Heath Ledger kind of in his prime there, but even aside from that, it's there are definitely moments in it that I watched when I kind of stepped back and said, okay, you still don't like the music, because the second they started We Will Rock You, it's like 2 minutes into the movie and I was like, man, I just don't like this.
I mean, to be fair, and I completely understand you, and it's completely fair. At least, at least they have the decency of doing it from the get-go,
Oh
because I
yeah,
think
I mean,
it would
it's
be, yeah, it would be much worse if it would be like a regular medieval film, and then suddenly you get all these aspects, So at least they do it from the very first minute, like you said.
oh yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
almost immediately. So I just kind of said, okay, you don't like that, that's fine, set that aside, watch the movie aside from that. And like, I appreciated it, I think, more on this watch than I did when I watched it before, because that just kind of got in my brain and I wasn't able to really get outside of that. And watching it this time, saying, okay, that's not a thing you particularly resonate with. What about the rest of the movie? And yeah, I was able to see a lot more of the appeal beyond the music. And so if people were on board with the music, that's why I can see that it has a
Like a following.
larger
Yeah.
cult following, like why so many people love it. I mean, yeah, I think most people, but maybe not most, but a lot of people really do enjoy this movie. And I can see why. Like I said, pulling back a little bit and saying, okay, this taste aside, what else is there that people are connecting with? And there are a lot of elements in it that really do work, I think, for the story. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's, I mean, at least for me, seeing it nowadays in another context, and after seeing like literally, hundreds of films between 2001 and right now, I appreciate the fact that it's so earnest, because a lot of films nowadays have to be a little more cynical, or they have to be more self-conscious, or even if they have like in any kind of like earnest element, they have to like mention it afterwards, because oh no, you cannot be too sincere nowadays. I
Right.
love that sincerity. I love that it has a heart. I love that it's sincere. I love that it probably knows it's a little bit cliched, but it doesn't care. It just presents you with the story, and you either like it, and you either connect with the characters and their struggles or not. So I mean, and obviously it's the whole nostalgia thing, because that sincerity plus the fact that I saw it as a kid, it combines, and it makes me like it a little bit more. But yeah, I like that earnestness. Sorry. I think it's something that's sometimes a little bit missed in some big films nowadays, and not everything has to be like quippy, or cynical, or self-conscious. You sometimes you just have to tell the story, and if it's a little bit maybe a little bit cheesy, it's fine. I don't mind a little bit of cheese, I think.
Yeah.
Basically.
No, I can totally see that. Yeah, so as a lover of horror movies and rom-coms, I love
Awesome.
so that's like that's kind of their wheelhouse. So
Yeah.
it's something in that kind of in that vein. So yeah, no, I love that. So if I usually like to talk about either a best worst line, so a line that you really love but maybe is very cheesy, or a best worst character, so somebody who's great but also is maybe not great. So do you have any feeling, any line that sticks out to you as a best worst line or a best worst character or anything like that?
'It's a very good question. I mean, to be fair, and I think it's obviously it's done on purpose. There are a couple of scenes in which Heath Ledger's character, he's trying to write these romantic letters to Shannyn Sossamon's character, and um, I mean they're terrible on purpose because he's a guy who doesn't really know how to express his feelings, and I think those lines are really really cringy, but it's done on purpose, so it's fine. Um, like it's basically Chaucer trying to teach him how to be romantic, and he's not very good at that, which is it's fair, and it's a source of comedy in the film. I guess, I mean, if it's a bad line that I like, um, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Um,
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know. That's
the
yeah.
whole scene with him, the whole scene with him in like when he goes and they're in the church or whatever, and he's telling her the lines that he had come up with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That
yeah,
is no, those are pretty those are pretty best worst because they hit right in that, oh, that's awful. And but it's exactly what you want to hear then, is that he learned nothing from the letter
yeah.
writing that they did.
I guess it would be. I mean, one of the bad ones would be whenever they try to create these puns with like very old timey dialogue that sounds modern. For example, I was just remembering this. There's this scene in which William tells her, because they're like flirting and stuff like that, and he tells her, "Well, then a fox you shall be until I find your name, my foxy lady." And it's like, oh god, they just tried to make a pun with like foxy because they were talking about animals, but foxy lady means something else in the 21st century. So it's like, that's a little bit, forced. So I
Yeah.
guess something like that would be, it's like, yeah, they're trying to be funny, but most of the film is pretty funny. But then whenever they try that kind of stuff, it's like, okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's
It's
fantastic.
yeah, it's like similar to the Nike thing. It's like, oh, we're trying to be like funny in a modern way, but it doesn't quite work always. So it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I super appreciate it.
No, thanks to
Where
you. Thanks for having me. This was really
yeah,
fun. Yeah, it
yeah.
was it was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, I mean, I was obviously part of the OFCS, which is the Online Film Critics Society. Also, well, as well as you are, we're part of the so it's the IFSC, which is the I always forget exactly what it means. I'm horrible. The International Film Society Critics. So yeah, we're part
Right
of
on.
that. So usually the social media keeps reposting or sharing our work. I like writing about film, about TV shows. I'm currently trying to make a couple of features, which is whenever you talk about indie productions, it takes a long time. So basically, we need money, which is obviously the main issue with any kind of like film potential filmmaker. And on Instagram, you can find me as Sebasava_cine, which means it's basically my name and the word movies, which is SEBAZAVA_CINE, in case you want to find me. And yeah, that's basically it. So I hope we can talk again. It was really fun, and yeah, thanks for
Ab-
having me again.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
All right. You can find this wherever you're listening. And yeah, thank you all for listening and joining us. And we'll see you next time on Best Worst Movies.
See you.